Let's pray. Oh, Father, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. We're still in our Psalm series this autumn, and we come to Psalm 8. And Travis and the other leaders musically prepared us to gaze into the heavens with the songs that were sung, and we've read responsibly Psalm 8. You know, Wendell Berry, the poet and writer, has said that the Bible is an outdoor book, by and large. And, of course, given life in the ancient world, how could that not be the case, right? So in our psalm today, the psalmist is outdoors, or at least recently has been. Initially looking up into the night sky. We're told this is a psalm of David, right, who was a shepherd and who would have slept out in the open most nights, looking up at the stars. And how could you not become then a stargazer when the landscape at night would be dark, dark, and the stars would be bright, bright? I almost thought I should have slept outdoors last night in preparation for this message, but from where I am, I can only see about a half dozen stars. There's been a lot of popular interest, if you've been paying attention, by the way, in space recently, or what the psalmist in our psalm calls the heavens. You may know that in September, NASA did something never before done. They actually changed the orbit of a planetary body, throwing the Dimorphos asteroid off course through a collision with a spacecraft they launched in a test of planetary defense. And now NASA says we are ready for anything the universe throws at us. The comment reveals a view of the heavens as a dangerous place, for sure. And I'm sure we've all seen plenty of movies to this effect. And I, for one, am glad that these folks studied math hard in school, so I'm feeling a little bit better about things. In July, if you were paying attention, the James Webb Telescope began sending remarkable images from space. That's the successor to the Hubble, showing us galaxies we've never quite seen in these ways before, taking only kind of a finger width space, showing just a crowded view, making us perhaps seem smaller and smaller in the grand scheme of things. You may also know that last year, Amazon's founder, Jeff Bezos, through his company Blue Origins, sent a second commercial space flight into the heavens with 4 people on board, including none other than Captain Kirk, Star Trek's William Shatner on board, for those of you who are old enough to know who he is. The 90-year-old actor had said he'd been really excited to travel into space. He'd been looking forward to it for 60 years. But you know, when he returned, he said he was really surprised by what he experienced there. Looking back on Earth, he writes in a recently published memoir, he was overwhelmed with sadness, the strongest feelings of grief that he's ever experienced. He says, what I saw in space was death, nothingness. And he developed a new affection for the Earth. What Shatner experienced actually has a name. It's called the overview effect. Space philosopher Frank White coined the term in 1987 to reveal kind of this emotional and cognitive shift that takes place in astronauts' identity when they go into space, where they suddenly do perceive the Earth as this tiny blue ball of life against a desolate darkness and apparently lifeless universe. And so this is one thing that astronauts and others see when they look into space these days. a hostile or a dead or a lifeless space, and an earth that is growing ever smaller and insignificant in their imagination. You know, it's hard not to get philosophical when you look up in the sky. It just happens. Happens with our psalmist. He looks up and he's also getting philosophical. But what he thinks of is God. And he also thinks of humankind. So as you heard, it begins, O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, and here's where his gaze falls back to earth. What is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him? This is a psalm of orientation. Remember early on in the series we talked about there are psalms of orientation, where everything is right with the world, or at least God is in his place. There's psalms of disorientation, where everything is out of whack, and then there's psalms of new orientation, where a new insight or hope or joy is discovered. Well, this is definitely a psalm of orientation. And you know, it's a psalm of wonder. If you notice how it begins and ends with the same line, O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. This is what the psalmist thinks of when he looks into space, the majesty of God. The way he actually puts it is, how majestic is your name? How majestic is your name? For the ancients, names meant a lot. My wife and I were a little embarrassed years ago when our girls came home from their Christian elementary school with the assignment to ask their parents what their names mean. Apparently, the teachers assumed that these children had thoughtful, intentional parents. We simply liked how their names sounded. The middle names were, ancestrally meaningful, but otherwise we really didn't know what to tell them. But for the Hebrews, names were actually quite meaningful, and they actually identified something essential about the person. And this was certainly true for the name God gave Moses for himself. Here in the first two lines of Psalm 8, we have this double address, O Lord, our Lord. And the first of these would have been the Hebrew letters YHWH, which we would pronounce Yahweh, although they would not pronounce it because of its sacredness. And Yahweh is actually an abbreviation of a longer name that Moses did receive for God in Exodus 3:14. When Moses asks him, hey, suppose I go to them and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask, what's his name? What shall I tell them, says Moses. And in response to Moses' question, God says, you tell him that I am who I am sent you. I am who I am. It's part of the same name that Jesus uses before the high priest in Mark 14:62 when asked if he was the Messiah, and Jesus scandalously says, I am, with all the connotations of that divine name. But what kind of name is I am who I am? Well, in Hebrew, actually, it's a verb. And it's a verb of action that is not yet completed. As in, I am who I am, which is to say, I am the one who is, but I am the one who continues to be. I am the one who is ongoing. I am the eternal God, the one who always has and will forever keep being God without end. It is a verb of incomplete action, of ongoing eternal being and existence. God is existence. He's given you and I existence. We have existence, but God is existence. That's what Yahweh means. I am who I am. And it has also a future aspect. You could also kind of translate it, I will be who I will be. Which is to say, I can't be manipulated. I can't be controlled. I will be who I will be. Through all the endless change, all the upheavals of history and of our lives, this might be refreshing reminder. God will be who he will be to us. So it makes sense that the psalmist would look up at the stars and think of God. And maybe you too have this kind of feeling. You look up at the stars, or even things on earth like the ocean or the redwood trees in Northern California, and you think, these things have been here before I was born, and they're going to be here after I transition. So there is a sense in which the stars and these other things have this sense of transcendence, have this sense of ongoing existence. And for the psalmist, far from this massive universe being a place of seemingly infinite dead matter, as Mr. Shatner experienced, the psalmist looks up and he says, this is the work of God's fingers. And this fills him with wonder. But it does make sense that his next question would be, who are we by comparison? Who is man that you are mindful of him, Yahweh? And the Son of Man that you care for him? In other words, as we, especially now, discover the greater and greater size of the universe, where do we fit in? Who are we? Are we just increasingly small and tiny and insignificant? Well, as it turns out, this is not the psalmist's view. When he looks back to earth from his gaze into heaven, what he wonders at is that God, and this is the word he uses, is that God is mindful of us. That God is mindful of us. This is now what captures his imagination at this point in the psalm. The word mindful in the scriptures, and we get it several times in the scriptures, means to lovingly pay attention to another. To lovingly pay attention to another. It means to stretch out our gaze to one another, to look upon them with love and with care. What is man, God, that you are mindful of him? It's going to be Advent soon, and we may have a chance to recall Gabriel's annunciation to Mary that she is going to bear God's son. And she, in turn, in Luke, wonders at this, saying, God has been mindful of the humble state of his servant. So now the focus of wonder has shifted from the heavens to God who actually sees us, to whom we matter, to whom he lovingly casts his gaze upon us. And so to answer the question, the psalmist says, you have made us a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned us with glory and honor. You have given us dominion over the works of your hands, and you have put all things under our feet. We matter to God. We matter. Of course, those middle verses of the Psalm, 5 and 6, are an echo of Genesis 1, verses 26 to 28, and I'll read those, where the Trinity says to itself, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. We have some of those around our house. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. There's been a lot of discussion, of course, about what exactly is this image of God that we have. But the best discussions of it are ones that ground us in what the original readers would have thought of when they heard the phrase, image of God. And here's what they would have thought of. Statues. They would have thought of statues. Their pagan neighbors would erect statues of their gods, what we might call idols. Now they knew these statues were not these gods. They were smart enough to know that the statues were not actually gods, but they were reminders of these gods. They were representations, they were pictures of these gods, and were sites where people could approach the gods. They, in a sense, represented these gods. They were images of who these gods were. You know, the command to the Israelites not to make any graven image of Yahweh was not necessarily the danger that they might think that image was actually God. It was because the proper representation of God couldn't be captured in a statue. The only proper representation of God would be God's people. God's people. Representing God in ways that a statue couldn't, representing God in a way that even the stars couldn't. God made humans in his image. They were, in a sense, the moving statues of who God is. See, the view of the universe for the psalmist is not this hierarchy where the biggest things matter most and the smallest things matter least. No. All of it speaks of God's majesty. But God, if you're going to choose something on earth, is best represented by humans who were created to represent him, to reveal or glorify what he is like in the particular way that at least sanctified humans could do, uniquely among God's creation. So the psalmist, looking up to the heavens, now back down to the earth, does not see an accidental and insignificant race of people, but ones, he said, are crowned with glory and honor, made a little lower than the heavenly beings. There's no consensus on what this little phrase, little lower than the heavenly beings, means, but there's no question that it's a designation of honor. And there's royal imagery in this psalm, chiefly in the wreathed crown that would be worn by priests or diplomats to designate that this person represents a king. We are the image of God because we are designed to represent him in the world, to the world, and to one another. Verse 6 says, "You have given us dominion over the work of your hands." And of course, this also is another echo of Genesis. And there's, of course, concerns, right, about this language of dominion, of the charge by God that we are to rule over creation. And in the language of Psalm 8, to have it placed under our feet. But in Genesis and in the larger context of Scripture, this is not a license for unlimited power now as his representatives. No. That's not what it means to be representative of Yahweh. Genesis 2:15, for instance, says, God placed Adam in the garden as the first such representative to cultivate it and keep it. To cultivate it and keep it. These two words, cultivate and keep, are elsewhere translated to serve and guard. And when these two words occur together in the Old Testament, they without exception, after the Garden of Eden, refer to priests. Priests were called to serve and guard the temple. That was their charge, to cultivate it and keep it. Priests would actually care for the temple grounds, that it wouldn't be defiled or polluted. Psalm 24 reminds us that the earth is the Lord's. Now the whole earth is his temple, and everything in it, and all who live in it. We are to cultivate and keep it. This is what it means to be a representative of God. This is his world. We are its priests. And what do priests do? They see everything in connection to God, and they help all things live together in his peace, in his shalom. They keep the house in order. to interact with creation, for instance, both as that which has been provided for our food and health and well-being, but also acknowledging that everything else has been also fathered by God. Humans, again, are indeed special. We are special among God's creation, but special because we are the only ones designed with both the capacity to order this world, to rule it, and to love beyond our instinct for personal survival. We are capable of transcending our mere instinct for survival, which is why we've been given this charge. And we should be trusted both to receive and guard the gifts of this world that are not our own. They belong to God. And then the psalmist gives us a list. Verses 7 and 9, all sheep and oxen, for instance, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the sea. O Lord, how majestic is your name. That list is interesting, for it moves from domesticated animals like sheep, oxen, beasts of the field, to those that are a little harder to domesticate. Certainly sheep, oxen can be easily employed for our well-being, but even a common sense keeper of these animals knows that the well-being of the beast is necessary for their continued service. But as we move down the list, we get to the birds of the heavens and the fish of the sea. We move into territory a little less under our human control, but sadly not free from human harm. I like to paddle in Upper Newport Bay, what the locals call Back Bay. I go out there, and instead of going to the right to the harbor, I go to the left to the bird estuary. And there's 70 species of birds out there, and they're pretty amazing. They're pretty amazing. And there's fish that are jumping around. And you know, while the birds may have taught us or inspired flight, we've never quite been able to harness them, right? Among kind of the creatures, it's like birds, we can't really get them to work for us very well. Right? Homing pigeons are maybe an exception. The fish of the sea, likewise, we can catch them and eat them, but otherwise they're mostly hidden to us. They're mostly, the best we can do is with difficulty trace them in the paths of the sea, as the Psalm 8 says. You know, there's a whole creation that is just outside still our control. And maybe so we can just continue to wonder at them. The reminder that they actually belong to God. The ancients actually had a healthy fear of sea creatures. When God is responding to Job out of the whirlwind, humbling him with this vision of everything God has made, he refers to the legendary sea serpent, the Leviathan. And he says to Job, can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook? Or tie down its tongue with a rope? Or can you put a cord through its nose or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it keep begging you for mercy? Will it speak to you with gentle words? Will it make an agreement with you for you to take it as your slave for life? These are rhetorical questions. No. We're not sure what the Leviathan was. We might think the same, for instance, of the blue whale. Will it make an agreement with us for us to take it as its slave? Not easily. So in other words, to have dominion is not to make everything as a means always to our own ends. Rather, it is sometimes to wonder at them and to praise their Creator. In Psalm 104, after a similarly long list of creatures, longer than we have here, the psalmist says, how many are your works, O Lord? In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. And that's how the psalm ends. Just with wonder. And of course, this brings us back to Psalm 8, because Psalm 8 is primarily a psalm of wonder. And I'm going to say that wonder is a biblical virtue. It's important to be amazed at what's around us and to see it as other. That's what wonder does. Wonder opens us suddenly to the otherness of the other as having its own existence, its own kind of relationship to God in whatever way that might be. Wonder is an ethical virtue. It sees the other as other and marvels at it. In early colonial literature, when Europeans were coming to the Americas, We see them often in their letters and diaries wondering at these native populations they came across, their dress, their costumes, their appearance. These entries are full of wonder and amazement. Unfortunately, this didn't last. The good virtue of wonder was ultimately overcome by their vices of greed and self-seeking, which led to enslavement, of course. But this is not what God had in mind when he set us up as those who had dominion over the earth, or priests of the earth. In both the Old Testament and New Testament, we are called priests of this earth that connect all things to God. And this is what the psalmist wonders at. He wonders both at the power and intelligence of God in weaving together the galaxies, but also the mindfulness he has of us and his entrusting us to carry out his image on earth. And so the psalmist closes as he begins, not just with a view of the galaxies, but an amazement that God would be mindful of us and give us this stewardship. And so he begins with this, ends with the same verse he began, but now it's fuller. O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. So what's the application here? Well, obviously there's much fodder here for ongoing ethical discussions of our stewardship of the world. Remembering that not only is the world our environment, but we to some degree are each other's environment. Perhaps more simply, though, as an application to start, is maybe you and I need to go out into the night sky a little more often, to regularly look up and wonder at what God has created, to go camping, and then to look down and around and wonder that God has actually made us his image bearers on earth, the keeper of all he has made, providing for us for sure, but calling us to a fitting relationship with all that is around us. I mentioned when I opened that this is the first psalm of praise in the Psalter, Psalm 8. The preceding psalms leading up to it are written under adversity and persecution. Psalm 5, 6, and 7, I notice my Bible entitles these, Trust in God for deliverance from enemies, Prayer for recovery from grave illness, and Psalm 7, Plea for help against persecutors. But then we get to Psalm 8, and the psalmist reorients us to the majesty of God in a world that sometimes feels out of control. And so, yes, here it comes. I'll leave you with a poem by Wendell Berry. Thomas will put this up, which seems to be written as a response to Psalm 8, though I don't know that Berry consciously wrote it such. But here in this poem, the poet, sleepless with worry, goes out into the night. He lies down on the ground amid all other things God has created, and he sees the stars, which he calls day blind, which is to say, stars that can't be seen by us in the daytime, but preside over the world as surely as God does. And it is in this moment, looking up, and seeing what's around him, that he finds peace. I'll read it. By the way, the poem is called The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, when despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, at that moment I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water. Do you hear Psalm 23 there? I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world, and we would say the grace of the Creator of the world. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.